There's something almost theatrical about the way Donald Trump introduces policy. A few sharp words, a bold tweet, maybe a rally chant or two, and suddenly the headlines light up. Trump slaps tariffs on 60 nations, tariff man returns. Global economy braces. But as the dust starts to settle on this latest round of economic aggression, a quieter truth emerges beneath the noise. Nothing is fixed. No formal documents, no signed agreements, no legally binding trade frameworks, just declarations. In an administration defined by disruption, this might feel familiar. But even by Trumpian standards, the new tariff regime stands out, not because of what it does, but because of what it doesn't. There's no structure, no predictability, no real clarity on who's being hit, how much they're paying, or how long it will last. One country hears 50%, another hears 15%. Some industries are targeted while others are mysteriously spared. It's trade by impulse, not trade by design. This is more than a paperwork problem. It's a governance crisis. In typical trade negotiations, countries spend months, sometimes years, hammering out the smallest details. Pages and pages of clauses, caveats, compliance terms. But what the Trump administration is delivering looks nothing like that. Instead, what's driving billions of dollars in global market shifts are cryptic sound bites and vague, TV-ready declarations. And that should worry everyone, from CEOs to consumers. Behind the curtain, even Trump's allies admit there's no real policy scaffolding here. Sectoral tariffs overlap with country-based ones, confusing importers, exporters, and regulators alike. And when a reporter asks what's actually in the deal with Japan or the EU, the answer depends on who you ask and when. Countries have already begun walking back verbal agreements they say they never formally approved. Even among U.S. agencies, there's a lack of consensus. What was tweeted last week might not survive the morning's press conference. And that's the point. The chaos is the strategy. By keeping everything in flux, Trump maintains the illusion of control, the constant ability to renegotiate, to threaten to withdraw. But here's the cost. Businesses don't know how to plan. Economists don't know how to model. And voters, well, they're left guessing how it all connects to the cost of groceries or the security of their jobs. So when we say nothing is fixed, we don't just mean the ink hasn't dried. We mean there was no ink to begin with. We're watching a president remake the global economic order with a combination of personal bravado and legal vagueness. And while the spectacle might be entertaining to some, for the people living with rising prices, supply chain confusion, and corporate hesitation, this is not a show. It's a crisis without a script, because if nothing is fixed, then everything, including your paycheck, your savings, your job, it was up for grabs. It didn't take long for the shockwaves to travel. Within hours of the Trump administration's new tariffs being announced, finance ministers from Tokyo to Berlin were on the phone. Importers scrambled, exporters reeled, and global markets flinched. For countries that rely on steady rules-based trade, this wasn't just another aggressive policy move. It was a declaration that the rule book no longer mattered. Japan, for instance, was one of the first to raise the alarm. A handshake deal had apparently been made. But when Japanese officials reviewed the U.S. side's interpretation, it didn't match what they'd agreed to. There were no signatures, no documents, just Trump's word and a press release. That's not how trade works. The EU faced a similar situation, verbal agreements, that were later contradicted by tweets. Behind closed doors, diplomats began to admit something, rarely said out loud in modern trade talks. They didn't trust the United States to keep its word. This isn't just a diplomatic inconvenience, it's a system-wide problem. The global economy is built on predictability. Countries spend years forming trade blocs, negotiating tariff schedules and aligning regulations. Now, one country, armed with economic firepower and unpredictability, is throwing that system into disarray. And when that country is the United States, the shock isn't just felt, it reshapes how the rest of the world does business. Look at what companies are doing. Many are pulling back on international investments, shelving expansion plans, or diverting supply chains to avoid getting caught in the crossfire. Some are accelerating moves to China Plus One, strategies not just to hedge against Beijing, but to avoid Washington's volatility. The logic is simple. If your largest trade partner acts like a wild card, you diversify fast. Meanwhile, lawyers are winning big. Trade lawyers, compliance consultants, litigation experts, all are in high demand as corporations try to decipher what these tariffs mean, how they might evolve, and whether they can be challenged in court. This is not healthy economic behavior. It's defensive maneuvering in an unstable environment. Money is being spent not on innovation or growth, but on legal insulation from policy chaos. Even more quietly, trust is evaporating. Allies are reconsidering how deeply to integrate with an America that plays by no stable rules. Emerging economies are turning to China, Brazil, or regional blocs to fill the vacuum. And multinational CEOs? They've stopped looking to Washington for predictability. They're watching it like a threat. So when we talk about Trump's tariff regime as lacking detail, that lack is not just bureaucratic and it's existential. In a hyper-connected world, trade uncertainty doesn't stay confined. It spreads, multiplies, and corrodes confidence. And the damage isn't measured in news cycles. It's measured in lost investments, strained alliances, and the gradual unraveling of a global system that took decades to build. If the global ripple effects are disruptive, the confusion at home is downright paralyzing. On paper, America is the one setting these rules. But inside boardrooms across the country, executives aren't celebrating. They're bracing for impact. Because the truth is, even American companies don't know what's coming next. And when the rules are always changing, the only rational response is to pull back, play defense, and wait. Normally, when a government implements trade policy, businesses adapt through careful planning. They hedge, they shift suppliers, they model out costs. But what we're seeing now is something entirely different. A corporate sector, frozen in uncertainty. CEOs aren't just confused about the numbers. They're confused about the intent. Will the tariff on semiconductors rise again next quarter? Will it vanish overnight in a tweet? Will a certain country be punished on Monday and rewarded by Friday? When nothing is fixed, nothing is forecastable. The result? Retraction. Quiet, cautious, calculated retraction. Capital expenditures are delayed. Hiring plans are put on hold. Expansion into global markets is stalled not because of competition, but because no one trusts what the rules will be 3 months from now. This is not just theory. It's visible in the earnings calls, in the market guidance revisions, in the rising mentions of policy risk in investor briefings. The language of innovation is being replaced by the language of uncertainty. Small and medium-sized businesses, the backbone of the U.S. economy, are feeling it even harder. These aren't multinational giants with teams of trade, lawyers, and global infrastructure. They're family-run operations, local manufacturers, regional suppliers. They import parts. They export goods. And every time a new tariff is announced, they scramble to assess the damage. Do they pass on the cost to customers? Absorb it themselves? Lay people off? Or just close shop quietly, hoping someone notices? In sectors like agriculture, electronics, automotive parts, and construction materials, the fog of policy is as costly as the tariffs themselves. A 25% import tax isn't just a number on a spreadsheet. It's a signal, a warning that supply chains are no longer secure, that yesterday's prices mean nothing today, and that tomorrow's decisions might be completely reversed by political whim. This is where chaos becomes its own form of control. By destabilizing expectations, Trump has created an environment where business planning becomes guesswork, and compliance becomes a gamble. Some companies hedge their bets and stay close to power. Others just try to keep their heads down and survive. But the broader message is unmistakable. The United States, long a beacon of regulatory stability, is now viewed as an unstable partner. And let's be clear, this isn't about being anti-tariff or pro-globalism. It's about knowing the rules before you play the game. Right now, the game has no rules, only reactions. And when the most powerful economy in the world governs through reaction instead of strategy, domestic industries do what they must: retract, retreat, and prepare for the worst. For all the noise and bluster, one thing is becoming clearer by the day. Trump's new tariff regime doesn't just suffer from policy ambiguity, it rests on shaky legal ground. The foundation of these sweeping trade actions is not a detailed legislative framework, but a controversial reading of executive power. And now, after months of executive overreach and legal improvisation, the courts are circling. At the heart of this battle lies a statute, a Cold War-era law that Trump's team has interpreted as a green light to impose broad, tariffs under the justification of national security. But there's a catch. That statute doesn't mention tariffs at all. It was never designed for this kind of economic manipulation. And now, federal judges are beginning to ask the obvious question: is any of this even legal? Just last week, the U.S. Court of Appeals heard arguments that cut straight to the core. Multiple judges expressed skepticism. Their tone was sharp. Their questions pointed. And while no ruling has been issued yet, the implications are enormous. If the courts decide these tariffs exceed presidential authority, the entire system could unravel in a single decision. This is more than a procedural challenge. It's a constitutional reckoning, because if a president can impose massive economic penalties on allies and rivals alike, without congressional oversight, without documentation, without due process, then where does that power end? What's to stop a future administration from weaponizing tariffs for political revenge, or to punish dissent, or to manipulate markets in election years? Trump seems to understand the stakes. That's why he's already begun publicly attacking judges, suggesting that courts should stay out of trade policy, warning that any intervention would damage the economy. But that's not how constitutional checks work. Courts aren't supposed to weigh the political convenience of a decision. They're supposed to weigh its legality. And legally, these tariffs are built on sand. Meanwhile, lawyers on both sides are cashing in. Corporate America is flooding firms with questions. Can we sue? Should we sue? Is this enforceable? What happens if it all gets overturned? The uncertainty has turned into a feeding frenzy. And again, the only real winners, for now, are the legal teams billing by the hour. But the longer this legal limbo drags on, the more damage it does. Investors are holding back. International partners are stalling agreements. Supply chains are rerouting. Because why negotiate with Washington? Today, if a court decision could nullify everything tomorrow, the irony is sharp. Trump, who ran on restoring American strength and predictability, may have built a trade system so unstable, so legally fragile, that its collapse is not just possible, it's probable. And when that collapse comes, it won't be with headlines or handshakes. It'll be with a judge's signature, a quiet ruling, and the sound of decades of precedent being restored. For all the debates in boardrooms and legal chambers, there's one arena where Trump's tariff regime faces its most unforgiving test: the lives of everyday Americans. Because no matter how well a narrative plays in a campaign speech, or how many headlines it hijacks, people eventually look at their bank accounts, their grocery bills, and their paychecks. And when those numbers don't line up with the promises, no slogan can cover that gap. This is where the politics of tariffs collide with the reality of the American wallet. As of now, unemployment is climbing, the highest it's been since the pandemic. Nearly 2 million people out of work, not because of a global recession, not because of a banking collapse, but because of a self-imposed economic disruption disguised as strategy. And when the administration fires the very officials tasked with reporting that data, it doesn't hide the truth, it exposes it. The cost of living is up. A Yale study estimates that tariffs are costing the average U.S. household around $2,400 a year. That's not an abstraction. That's groceries, gas, rent. That's school supplies, medical bills, the difference between staying afloat and falling behind. And while Trump may insist the economy is booming, Americans don't need a press release to understand what's happening. They feel it every time they swipe their card and wonder why the total keeps rising. This is a pain that can't be spun. You can't tell someone that prices are down when their grocery bill says otherwise. You can't say wages are rising when their paycheck looks the same but covers less. For years, Trump has relied on bluster, statements that are emotionally charged but economically hollow. But inflation, layoffs, rising costs, these things pierce through propaganda. They're too immediate, too personal. And then there's the psychological toll, the gaslighting, the attempt to create an alternate reality where the economy is thriving, when families are clearly struggling. It's more than dishonest, it's insulting. People know what they can afford. They know what they're sacrificing. And they know when a leader is pretending not to notice. Historically, this kind of economic deception is a hallmark of authoritarian regimes. When reality becomes too inconvenient, they attack the messengers, silence economists, discredit journalists, fire officials. But that tactic doesn't erase hardship. It amplifies it. And eventually, it breaks trust. Once voters stop believing the numbers, they stop believing the leadership. And when that trust fractures, it rarely returns. Trump's greatest political liability isn't legal. And it isn't diplomatic. It's emotional. It's the betrayal people feel when a man who promised prosperity delivers instability, when the price of loyalty is paid in financial stress, and when the only thing rising faster than tariffs is the sense that the system is rigged, not for the working American, but against them. There's a tension brewing beneath the surface of the current trade landscape that goes beyond tariffs and legal battles. It's a clash of identities. On one side, you have the ideal of free markets, capitalism in its purest form, open competition, minimal government interference, and the natural winners and losers that come with it. On the other, there's a growing impulse toward control, a centralized power, structure where the government picks winners and losers, dictating who succeeds and who falters. And this tension is playing out not just in policy, but in the very soul of what American capitalism means today. President Trump's tariff regime embodies this fractured identity. For decades, free market capitalism has been a core part of American political and economic identity. It's the engine that has driven innovation, growth, and prosperity. CEOs, investors, and voters alike have bought into the narrative of competition and meritocracy. But what happens when the government starts flexing its muscles, threatening CEOs, imposing unpredictable tariffs, and seemingly turning the rules of the game on their head? This isn't just abstract theory. It's real life for companies and consumers trying to navigate the uncertainty. Imagine being a CEO of a major corporation like Intel, suddenly under threat from the highest office in the land, not because of poor business strategy, but because of political posturing. The fundamental rules of capitalism say that market forces, consumer demand, and innovation determine success. When political interference upends this balance, the entire ecosystem starts to wobble. What we're witnessing is a shift from free markets toward a form of economic nationalism, where the state exerts outsized influence over market outcomes. This is a departure from the traditional pro-business, pro-growth stance that many Trump supporters champion. Instead, what they're getting is a selective, almost arbitrary intervention, where some sectors or companies are favored and others penalized. The winners don't necessarily emerge because they're the best, but because they're politically aligned or strategically positioned within this new system. This dynamic creates confusion and instability. Businesses are forced to reconsider investments, supply chains, and hiring decisions in the face of ever-changing trade policies. Consumers, meanwhile, feel the pinch as prices rise and product availability shifts. The promises of tariffs, making America great again, ring hollow when the chaos costs every day. People more money and jobs feel less secure. At its core, this fractured identity challenges the American dream of economic opportunity through merit and effort. If success is increasingly determined by political favor or government whims, then the social contract between leaders and citizens frays. People start to question not just policies, but the legitimacy of the entire system. That's a dangerous place for any democracy. And yet this isn't merely a clash of economics. It's also a political gamble. Trump's strategy seems to rely on a transactional approach, keeping supporters loyal by ensuring they're on the winning side of the intervention, while others are left to fend for themselves. It's a zero-sum game that might rally a base in the short term, but risks alienating broader constituencies over time. The key question is, how long can this fractured identity sustain itself? Can American capitalism tolerate a version where government control undermines free markets? Or will the pressure for clarity, consistency, and fairness force a return to more traditional economic principles? As we watch this unfold, the stakes couldn't be higher, not just for businesses and consumers, but for the very character of America's economic future. The answer will shape not only the next chapter in trade, policy, but the fundamental trust people place in the system that governs their livelihoods. President Trump's new tariff regime hasn't just shaken up trade, relationships worldwide. It's created a fog of uncertainty that's making it nearly impossible for businesses to plan or operate confidently. What's striking is not just the tariffs themselves, but how little concrete information has been provided to the companies and countries affected. Trade deals typically come wrapped in reams of detailed documents, legal language spelling out exactly what's taxed, at what rate, and under which conditions. This transparency allows businesses to adjust strategies, manage supply chains, and anticipate costs. But with Trump's tariffs, the details remain murky, communicated through tweets, headlines, and last-minute announcements instead of official agreements. That uncertainty is a problem that ripples across the economy. Companies don't know if tariffs on critical materials like steel or semiconductors will suddenly spike, or if exemptions they hope for will be revoked. Japan is already voicing confusion about what exactly is covered in their so-called deals. Brazil faces steep tariffs on some products but not others, creating an inconsistent patchwork that defies logic. When businesses can't predict costs, they pull back. Investment slows. Hiring freezes. Research and development budgets tighten. The entire innovation pipeline risks drying up under the weight of this unpredictability. Consumers eventually feel the fallout, with higher prices and fewer choices on the shelves. Meanwhile, the legal battles have only added to the chaos. Federal courts are weighing whether the tariffs themselves are lawful, with some judges signaling skepticism about the legal grounds Trump's administration is using to justify these sweeping trade actions. The possibility that courts could strike down the tariffs altogether hangs like a sword over the market, adding yet another layer of risk. All of this creates a wait-and-see atmosphere that's toxic for economic growth. No CEO wants to place big bets when the rules of the game can change overnight or when policy decisions seem more like political theater than strategic planning. The only clear winners so far? Lawyers, who are busy navigating and litigating this complex and unstable environment. The stakes for ordinary Americans couldn't be higher. The administration promised that tariffs would protect jobs and boost wages, but rising prices at the grocery store and gas pump are a painful reality. The cost of goods is going up, yet wage growth remains flat or stagnant. For millions of households already stretched thin, this disconnect is no small thing. It shapes how they vote, how they shop, and how they see the future. Ultimately, the current trade policy is a gamble. One that's betting on chaos and confusion as leverage. But history teaches us that uncertainty rarely leads to prosperity. What's needed is clarity, stability, and cooperation, ingredients in short supply in this new era of tariff-driven trade wars. Thanks for watching this video. Make sure to like and subscribe for more.